The first thing that we need to do to work with PHP is just to make sure that our local development environment is running. And what that's going to do is simulate a web hosting space. So we talked about how in the absence of a web hosting space, this page is just going to print as a text file. And that has to do with me trying to access it using this local URL. Again, I am simulating a web hosting space. So what I need to do instead is go to localhost 8888, and right now that doesn't want to connect, and I think, let me see, I think what I need to do is remap the folder. So let's go and find, oh, I haven't started my servers yet. I'm going to do both then. I'm going to go to my preferences, and I'm just going to make sure that I am mapping to the right host, or the right root folder. In this case, that's going to be this GRD 188 folder. And click OK. And then I'm going to start my servers. Once I get the green light that Apache is running, then all I need to do from there, and I'm getting a yellow light right now. That might be a MySQL issue. Let's see though. If it is, as long as Apache is running, that's fine. This actually starts Apache, MySQL, PHP, and Apache's the one that needs to be running. So let's go back to the browser and let's see. Yeah, if I reload, you see now I get this file tree. So this looks a lot more like when I go to my hosting space so far. And now when I choose template.php, it looks just like it did on my hosting space. And that's because within this piece of software, within MAMP, I have the ability to run PHP on my computer and simulate that hosting environment. Now I want you to keep in mind, this is really important. Just because this looks like a website now, understand that this just simulates a hosting environment. This link of localhost is still only on your computer, and you're the only one who can get to it. So when it's time to turn in the website, you still have to put it on your actual hosting space. You're still going to need to go through FileZilla and copy it over, and you're still going to need to make sure that it winds up on your hosting space to really be accessible via the web. What we're doing right now is just simulating a hosting experience. So keep that in mind. But let's keep moving with this. So let's come back to Sublime Text. And let's take a look at the template and talk about the things that need to be the same on every page. So what I want to do is I'm going to change my view here real quick to a 2-column layout. And in the second column, I'm going to open up my style guide. And I want you to look at these two files and kind of scan down. Where do you see differences? Now for me, I see differences in the content of the description meta, but I see that both of them actually have a meta with a name equal to description. It's just the value within that content attribute that's different. And I see that my title attribute contents is different, right? But both pages have a title attribute, so they both have this opening title tag and this closing title tag. All of the style sheets should be identical. There should be a head, right? After that, there should be a body. The body should start with a header that includes my nav element that has an unordered list with all of my top-level navigation on both pages, and that should be identical on both pages. And then my main element with a class of container is identical on both pages. And then they both start with a row. And now in this case, they both start with this div of 12 columns, but that might not always be the case, right? That just means if I want a single column layout, then I'm probably going to start with that. And in most cases, I probably will, but this could be subject to change, right? I might want to start my portfolio page, for example, with a 3-column layout or a 4-column layout. So keep that in mind too. But what I could do is at least up to this div with a class equal to row, all the way up to here. I could put this, if I had the ability to put this all in a single file, as long as I also had the ability to provide unique values for this and for this, I could save myself a lot of heartache here. And that's what PHP is going to do for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to come back to my file structure here. And I need to create one new folder. And I'm going to call it INC, which is short for includes. And includes is a place where we are going to store pieces of code. Now keep in mind, we're never going to put whole pages there. Whole pages still need to be in the root folder. But we're going to use this to store pieces of code that we want to use on more than one page. So this is kind of like having, paragraph styles and character and object styles in InDesign in a way. It gives you these modular pieces of code that we can use in more than one place. This is also very similar within the includes folder to having parent pages in InDesign. So keep that in mind as well. This is really for the stuff that we want to use more than once, and we want it to be the same every time we use it, with maybe just a couple of modifications. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take that code in the template only. I'm not going to worry about style guide right now, but in the template only, I am going to take from my doc type from line 1 all the way down to my main element opening. And I'm actually going to go ahead and grab this opening div tag that has a class of row as well, because we learned that with skeleton, if I want columns, they have to be contained in a row. So really, I'm going to need this right after the main element opens for any layout that I want. It's just that this layout might change, how many columns I want to span. I'm going to select all of that code. And what I want you to do is cut, which is Command X or Control X on a PC. So not copy, but cut. Remember, you've got a backup, so just be brave now. I'm going to cut that out. And then I'm going to write a comment for myself that says, everything above this line is in the head code file. And I'm going to select that, and I'm going to do a Command / to comment it out. And then I'm going to save my template.php file. Now remember, I've still got template.html in here too. So if I really mess this up, I have a couple of places where I can come back and get the latest version of this template. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention before you do this, you do really want to make sure that template.html is correct. You want to make sure that it passes validation, that you fixed all the errors. You can do it afterwards, but it's a lot easier if you start with a template that is 100% validated and clean code. Just makes it a little bit easier, because what we're doing now is we're going to be cutting that file up into several different files, and so it can be a little bit harder to fix after that. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is put that code that I just cut into a file so that I can reuse the code on every page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close my style guide over here, and that automatically initiates a new file for me here. So I've got a line 1. All I have to do is Command or Control V to paste. And I now have all of that code here. What I'm going to do, since again, this is not a whole page. This is a piece of a page, right? This gives me the top part of a page, but it doesn't have the end of the page. So I'm going to do a save as. And this time I'm going to move to that new folder I just made called INC. I'm going to keep this as HTML, and I'm going to name it headcode.html. I'm putting it in my includes folder. Okay, so let's talk about what we've done to this point. Now, if I come back to my browser and I reload this local version of template.php, what's going to happen is the top nav is going to go away, because it's in a different file. And you can see everything else is there, but the top nav went away, right? And the reason for that is that it's in a different folder. So now if I go to just localhost and I go check that includes folder out, we see head code. And when I open head code, all I see is this plain HTML version of my nav bar. But if I view the source code, we can see that all the code that I cut and paste is there. It's just that things are disconnected right now. So at this point, if you check it, you'd probably be likely to panic a little bit and think you did something wrong, but you didn't. We're just not done yet. So far what we've done is to get that code that we need to use on more than one page into its own file, but we still need a way to get it back on the pages where we want to use it, and that's where PHP comes in. So right now we've got this plain old HTML file in our includes folder. We need to make sure that we are working in a file here, a page file that has an extension of .php. So in template.php, we need to actually add some PHP code now. I'm going to hit enter a couple of times, and I'm going to start with opening PHP tags. So this works kind of like HTML, but now we're using a different language, so we just have to note that a different way. And the way PHP tags start is with a less than symbol and a question mark and the letters PHP with no spaces in between and all lowercase. The way that it closes is with a question mark and a greater than symbol. So after that, as long as everything that I'm writing that's PHP is within these two tags, I can mix PHP with HTML. So you can see how my HTML is still here, and I can still use regular HTML outside of these PHP tags. So that's what allows us to make HTML just a little bit more dynamic. So what I can do now is use a command that's part of PHP's, essentially its dictionary of terms. This is some code that's already written in there called a function that can allow us to place this file on the page in a very similar way to how we've placed our style sheets here. So we're going to use a relative path and tell the browser as relative to template.php where the rest of this code is. So as relative to template.php, the code that we want at the top of the page is in this folder called includes, and it's in a file called headcode.html. So what I need to do is write a statement for PHP that begins with the word include. That's a command. And then I'm going to put parentheses there, no spaces. I'm going to put single quotes. By the way, when we're working with PHP, whenever we need quotes, we probably want to use single quotes because we're already using double quotes for HTML, and using separate devices like that can be helpful. It can help avoid errors in your code or bugs. So I'm going to use single quotes. And now I'm going to provide that relative path, which is just the includes folder, right? inc/headcode.html. And just like CSS, PHP commands end with a semicolon. So I have to make sure I have that semicolon in there. And now, with just this little bit of code here, if I save this file and I come back to the browser, headcode's still not going to look right. But if I come back to template.php, what's happening is that navigation bar is being pulled from that include folder and that file in the include folder. And because my style sheets are being mapped also using a relative path from this page, the browser can find them and load them. They can't find them when the PHP file is in the includes folder because those paths don't work, right? So if we look in the includes folder here, this is saying as relative to headcode.html, there should be a folder named CSS, and that's not the case. So that's why that's happening. I know that's a little bit confusing, but basically with PHP, you have to remember that paths are relative to the page where the code is being placed, not the place where we're storing the little pieces of code. So just make sure that you're putting all of your pages in the same folder, which in this case should be your root folder, your GRD188 folder. Make sure you're putting all your pieces of code to use on those pages in the includes folder, and just try not to mix those up. Now, so now we've got our page working. You know, that probably feels pretty good. So let's get a little bit of practice with that by doing the same thing with the footer. So what I'm going to do next is come to my footer. And when I come down to my footer and start taking a look at everything that I have, sorry, I'm looking at headcode there. Okay, in template.php. Everything basically from the main element down, like where the main element closes, all the way to the end of the page should be exactly the same on every page as the footer, right? But remember, we put the code for this row opening in our head code because every single time we open that main with a class of container, the next thing that should be there is a row div. So really we could grab this closing row div right here as well and just remove that from the code so it's just one less thing to worry about on our pages. So I'm going to take everything from that closing row div down. And again, I'm going to cut, not copy, so that's Command or Control X. Command or Control X, and then I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to paste all of that code and do a quick save as. This is a piece of code, not a whole page. And so I need to put that in my includes folder, and I want to make sure that I'm using a similar structure. So if all of my pieces of code are going to have the HTML extension, head code does. So I need to make foot code in HTML instead of PHP. It would work if you did it as PHP, but it's sometimes better to keep them separate this way and to just be consistent. So now in my includes folder, I can put my foot code. And I can put both of my includes over here. So now basically what I'm looking at in the template is all the code that's going to need to be different on the template page from other pages. Now, again, when I come back to the browser with these changes saved, I'm going to lose my footer right now because I haven't put it on there, right? So now I'll keep my nav bar, but now when I refresh the page, my footer is going to go away. So you see here I have all of that, but I don't have a footer anymore until I place that PHP code that tells the browser where it can find the rest of the code for the page. So I'm going to include one more comment here, just like I did at the top, which is just going to be everything below this line is in the foot code file. Okay, so now I am going to comment that out. And I am again going to use some PHP to get my footer back. So I open up another PHP tag because so far I had some PHP at the top, and then I wanted some HTML, and now I want some more PHP. So I'm going to open up another PHP tag, and I'm going to make sure I close it right away so I don't forget. And I'm going to use that same command of include, and then parentheses, single quotes, and then a relative path to where my footer lives, which is still from template.php in the inc folder footcode.html. Then I need to remember that closing semicolon. And now when I save, and I come back to my browser, and I reload the page, my footer will be back. See, now I have my footer again. Now the interesting thing about PHP is I told you it's a preprocessor for hypertext or for HTML. So in the browser here, we see this page looking just like it is. And even though we know that template.html is actually composed, or I'm sorry, template.php is actually composed of a PHP command and then a bunch of HTML and then another PHP command. Check out what happens if you look at the source code in the browser. So if I view source in the browser, I'm only going to see HTML. I see all the stuff that was in the head code file. And then you see this comment about everything above this line is in the head code file. Then we see everything that's still in our template. And then we see this comment about everything below this line is in the foot code file. And then we see all the code that we put into our foot code. So hopefully this is starting to make a little bit of sense. I know that it still feels probably a little bit tricky, but this is almost the most complicated PHP we're going to use. It's not going to get too much more complicated than this, but we're going to learn more and more feature so that we can have some custom values in things like the description meta and in the title tag. Because right here it says each page needs a unique title and to describe the page using a complete sentence. So we don't want to have this boilerplate on every single page. So we need to use another construct of PHP just to be able to have unique values here for our different pages. We'll talk about that in the next video.